Detroit is no longer the Motor City. It is a command center watching its own limbs being amputated. In the last 12 months, the industrial heart of North America has effectively transplanted itself 2,000 miles south. The numbers do not lie, and they are terrifying for the American Rust Belt. 1 hour of labor in Michigan costs a manufacturer $28. That same hour, with equal precision and newer robots, costs $2.76 in Saltillo. This is not a recession. This is a structural replacement of the American industrial base. While Washington argues about tariffs, Mexico has silently built the most sophisticated automotive fortress on the planet. We are witnessing the Baguio Blitzkrieg, a synchronized economic maneuver that has outflanked the United States. General Motors, Ford, Toyota, and Volkswagen have all signaled the same reality. The future of mass production speaks Spanish. The collapse of Detroit isn't coming. It arrived on a freight train from San Luis Potosi this morning. If you believe American manufacturing is safe, you are looking at a map from 1990. The war for the dashboard is over, and the victor is not who you think. CTA, if you want to understand the real front line of global economics, subscribe now. We track the money others ignore. The weapon that killed the old Detroit is not a missile, but a geographic diamond located in the center of Mexico. They call it El Baguio to the untrained eye. It looks like dry plains and colonial towns. To a logistics strategist, it is the deadliest industrial cluster in the Western Hemisphere. This is not a collection of sweatshops. That is a myth from the 90s that keeps American unions sleeping comfortably while their jobs vanish. This is a network of hypermodern Tier 1 facilities that makes Ohio look like an antique shop. We must analyze the hardware. In the state of Guanajuato alone, you do not just have a factory, you have an ecosystem. Toyota, Honda, Mazda, and General Motors have established perimeters, so close they could almost share a cafeteria. But the real lethality lies in the supply chain density. In Detroit, a part might travel from 3 different states to reach the assembly line, fighting snowstorms and aging infrastructure. In the Baguio, the engine block, the transmission, and the leather seats are often manufactured within a 50-mile radius. This is just-in-time manufacturing perfected to a military standard. The proximity reduces the cash-to-cash cycle, time the speed at which raw metal becomes a sold truck by nearly 40% compared to traditional U.S. lines. Look at the machines. The robots welding the chassis of the new Toyota Tacoma in Guanajuato are not hand-me-downs from Kentucky. They are the latest Fanuc and Kuka units, shipped directly from Japan and Germany. These plants were built greenfield from scratch, meaning they have no legacy costs, no old layout issues, and no asbestos-filled basements to remediate. They were designed in 2020 for 2030 standards. The factory floor in San Luis Potosi, where BMW builds the 3 Series and the M2, is arguably more advanced than their facility in Spartanburg, South Carolina. It runs on solar power, recycles 100% of its water, and uses digital twin technology to simulate assembly errors before they happen. This is the arsenal. Absolute efficiency, weaponized against American overhead costs. Then there is the Northern Corridor. Saltillo in the state of Coahuila is effectively Detroit South, but without the rust. It is the stomping ground of Stellantis and General Motors. Here, the weapon is the freight rail network. The Kansas City Southern to Mexico KCSM Railway acts as the aorta of this system. It is a steel river that flows exclusively north. Every single day, mile-long trains, loaded with Ram trucks and GM's UVs, depart Saltillo. They do not stop until they hit the U.S. border. This logistics link is so vital that it is guarded like a nuclear silo. The efficiency of this rail link means a car built in Saltillo can be on a dealer lot in Dallas faster than a car built in Detroit can reach Miami. We must also discuss the shadow arsenal, the Chinese component. While Washington enacts tariffs and politicians give speeches, Chinese manufacturers like BYD and Chery have executed a masterclass in industrial camouflage. They are flooding Mexico not just with finished cars, but with the machinery to build them. They are setting up supplier parks in Nuevo Leon, just hours from the Texas border. By manufacturing in Mexico, or simply adding the final 30% of value there, they are technically creating a North American product. This is the ultimate strategic flank. Mexico is using China's hunger for the U.S. market to bolster its own industrial capacity. Detroit is fighting a two-front war. The low cost of Mexican labor and the high technology of Chinese supply chains fused together just south of the Rio Grande. The sheer volume of output is the final metric of this arsenal. We are talking about nearly 4 million units per year, with a capacity surging toward 5 million. But it's not just the number, it's the type of vehicle. Mexico has captured the most profitable segments. The pickup trucks, the SUVs, the high-margin electric vehicles, like the Mustang Mach-E. Detroit has effectively outsourced its profit centers. The big 3 are American in name, but their bank accounts are fed by lines in Cuautitlán and Hermosillo. The arsenal is fully operational, and it is aiming its production capacity directly at the heart of the U.S. market share. The decision to abandon Detroit was not made in a panic. It was made in silence. In the sterile boardrooms of the Renaissance Center in Dearborn, we call this phase the actuary's betrayal. It began with a cold calculation of the landed cost. Corporate intelligence. Units realized around 2022 that the transition to electric vehicles (EVs) would require a capital expenditure so massive that it would bankrupt them if they kept labor costs at US levels. The math was brutal. An EV requires 30% fewer labor hours to assemble than a gas car, but the battery costs are astronomical. To save the margin, the labor cost had to drop to near zero relative to the vehicle price. Intelligence reports from within the industry point to a specific turning point: the UAW United Auto Workers strikes. While the unions celebrated record wage hikes, the CEOs were quietly signing purchase orders for land in Nuevo Leon. It was a feint. They gave the unions the raise to keep the peace, knowing full well that new product allocation would go south. It is a tactical retreat. You don't fight the enemy where he is strong, US labor leverage. You move the battlefield to where he cannot follow. The intelligence here is the strategic decoupling of designed in USA from made in USA. There was also a failure of US counterintelligence regarding the USMCA United States-Mexico-Canada agreement. When the treaty was renegotiated, it was sold as a way to bring jobs back to America by raising the regional value content requirement to 75%. It backfired spectacularly. Mexican strategists and foreign investors read the fine print better than the authors. They realized that if they hit that 75% threshold in Mexico, they had duty-free access to the world's biggest economy. Instead of deterring investment, the USMCA effectively certified Mexico as the safe harbor for global capital. It gave German and Japanese companies a legal guarantee that if they built in Mexico, they were untouchable. We must analyze the role of the Mexican state governments. While the US federal government offered tax credits for consumers, Mexican state governors offered tax holidays for producers. Intelligence gathered from industrial park prospectuses in Monterey shows land being offered for pennies on the dollar, fast-tracked water permits in drought zones, and state-sponsored training programs where the government pays the wages of trainees for the first 3 months. They effectively de-risked the entry for foreign capital. They built the nest, and the birds flew south. Another critical intelligence failure was the underestimation of the Mexican engineering talent pool. For decades, the US assumed Mexico was only good for tightening bolts. That was a fatal error. Today, Monterey Tech ITESM and the National Polytechnic Institute produce more engineering graduates per capita than the US. These are not just assembly workers. These are CAD designers, automation specialists, and quality control managers who speak 3 languages and earn a third of what a Detroit engineer demands. The brain drain is actually a brain gain for the corporations moving south. They are getting German-level technical competency at developing nation prices. The final piece of intelligence is the Chinese Trojan horse. Us. Intelligence is now scrambling to track the flow of Chinese auto parts transiting through Mexican ports like Manzanillo and Lázaro Cárdenas. The volume of containers arriving from Shanghai and Shenzhen has spiked abnormally. These aren't just toys and electronics. They are subassemblies, microchips, and rare earth magnets, essential for EVs. The intelligence indicates that Chinese firms are using Mexico to wash the origin of these goods. By the time they cross into Texas, they are Mexican parts. Detroit is buying its own executioner's blade, forged in China and sharpened in Mexico. Part 3. The confrontation minute by minute. It is 4 a.m. on the floor of the General Motors plant in Ramos Arizpe. The facility is a cathedral of white light and humming pneumatics. While Detroit sleeps, this plant is running at 98% capacity. The confrontation is not a shootout. It is a race against the clock. For 15 a.m., the first shift of the day begins. 3,000 workers stream through the tiles. There is no picketing, no slowdown, no grievance filing. The discipline is military. They step onto the line to build the Chevrolet Equinox EVA car that is supposed to save GM. Every 58 seconds, a completed electric SUV rolls off the final inspection line. The silence is broken only by the rhythmic hiss-clack of the robotic arms installing battery packs. This specific vehicle is the confrontation incarnate. It is the mass-market EV that the US promised to build, but only Mexico could build profitably. 6 a.m. A freight train operated by Canadian Pacific Kansas City CP, KC pulls into the loading yard. It is 2 miles long. This is the iron conveyor belt. The loading teams drive the vehicles onto the auto racks with practiced speed. There is zero wasted movement. This train will carry $150 million worth of inventory. Its destination, the U.S. Midwest. It is a direct injection of foreign-made product into the domestic artery. 8:30 a.m., at the World Trade Bridge in Laredo, Texas, the confrontation becomes visible. The queue of semi-trucks on the Mexican side stretches for miles. The air is thick with diesel exhaust and heat. This is the busiest commercial border crossing in the Western Hemisphere. Every single truck represents a contract lost by a U.S. supplier. We watch a Kenworth truck hauling Tier 1 components wire, harnesses manufactured in Ciudad Juarez. Without these harnesses, the assembly lines in Michigan that do remain would grind to a halt within 48 hours. The U.S. auto industry is not just competing with Mexico, it is on life support provided by Mexico. The border agents scan the cargo, it clears, the truck accelerates onto I-35 North. The invasion is logistical. 10 a.m. in Detroit. A grim meeting takes place at a supplier for a major OEM. They have just received the request for quotation RFQ for the next generation of door panels. The target price set by the automaker is impossible to meet with U.S. labor rates. The manager looks at the spreadsheet. He knows that his competitor in Querétaro has already bid 20% lower. He has two choices: file for bankruptcy or open a plant in Mexico. The silence in the room is the sound of defeat. He picks up the phone to call a real estate broker in Guanajuato. The collapse happens in real time, one phone call at a time. 12 p.m., back in Mexico, at the port of Lázaro Cárdenas, on the Pacific coast. A massive vessel from BYD, the Explorer No. 1, is docking. It opens its bow doors and disgorges thousands of BYD Seagulls and Dolphins electric cars that cost under $20,000. These cars are not yet sold in the U.S., but they are flooding the Mexican market, pushing out American brands in their own backyard. But the threat is deeper. These cars are being disassembled by engineers from rival companies, studied and reversed engineered. The port is a beachhead. The sheer quality of the Chinese manufacturing shocks the observers. The panel gaps are perfect. The software is faster than a Tesla's. This is the flanking maneuver. If the U.S. border ever opens to these cars, Detroit ceases to exist instantly. 2 p.m., on the NAFTA superhighway I-35, the just-in-time rhythm hits a snag. A protest in Mexico briefly blocks a lane. The panic in U.S. logistics centers is instantaneous. Line-down warnings flash on screens in Tennessee and Alabama. This reveals the terrifying fragility of the U.S. position. They have allowed their entire industrial heartbeat to be located across a sovereign border. The Mexican authorities clear the road with aggressive efficiency. They know that the flow of goods is the national security priority. The trucks roll again. The U.S. lines are saved, but the dependency is exposed for the world to see. 4:30 p.m., the shift change in Ramos Arizpe. The workers leaving the plant walk to buses that will take them to new housing developments, paid for by the industrial boom. They have money in their pockets. The local economy is exploding with restaurants, cinemas, and car dealerships. Contrast this with the aerial view of Detroit at the same hour: empty lots, boarded-up windows, and a silence that hangs over the old Packard plant. The energy has transferred. One city is inhaling capital, the other is exhaling history. 6 p.m., the sun sets over the Bajío, the lights of the factories stretch to the horizon, a glittering sea of sodium vapor and lead. It looks like a colony on Mars. Inside, the third shift begins. The machines do not stop. The relentless churn of production continues. While American politicians debate the definition of infrastructure, Mexico is utilizing it to dominate the continent. The confrontation is over for the day, and the score is lopsided. Mexico, 12,000 units produced. Detroit, struggling to keep the lights on. Part 4. The aftermath, the new hierarchy. The smoke clears, and the map of North America has been redrawn. The Detroit collapse is not a singular event like a bomb going off. It is the slow, agonizing realization that the title of king has been transferred. The numbers in the aftermath are stark. Mexico is now the 7th largest vehicle manufacturer in the world, and climbing. It is the roughly 4th largest exporter of auto parts. But the most damning statistic is the value added. For every dollar spent on a car in the United States, an increasing percentage remains in Mexico. The U.S. has become assembly and consumption economy, while Mexico has become the production and engineering powerhouse. The big three are now global entities with their brains in the U.S. but their muscle in Mexico. This leaves the American worker in a precarious position, relegated to warehousing, sales, and service. While the core skill of making things we are seeing the rise of mech-shoring as the dominant economic model of the 2030s. This is the permanent state of affairs. The infrastructure built in Mexico, the pipelines, the rail spurs, the specialized power grids, is a sunk cost. It is not moving back. Even if the U.S. lowered wages to match Mexico, an impossibility, the ecosystem is now there. You cannot move a rainforest. The political fallout is the final stage of this collapse. We will see increasing desperation from Washington: more tariffs, more border closures, more Buy American mandates. But these are reactionary measures. They are attempts to legislate against gravity. The market has spoken. Capital flows to efficiency. The outsmarting was simple. Mexico focused on being the best place to build a car, while the U.S. focused on being the best place to finance one. The lesson for the viewer is brutal but necessary. National sovereignty in the 21st century is built on industrial capacity. You cannot print your way to power. You have to build it. Mexico understood this. They sacrificed, they planned, and they executed a 30-year strategy to capture the crown jewel of American industry. Today, when you hear the roar of a Ford Mustang or the hum of a GM EV, you are likely hearing the heartbeat of the Bajío. Detroit is a museum. Mexico is the factory.